June 16th, 1944. Finschhafen Air Base, New Guinea. A 42-year-old civilian climbs into the cockpit of a Lockheed P-38 Lightning for the first time. No uniform, no rank insignia. Just a borrowed leather flight jacket and a determination that would change the Pacific War. Around him, young fighter pilots watch with barely concealed skepticism as the famous aviator settles into the fighter's twin-boom design. Some smirk, some whisper. All of them are thinking the same thing. This aging celebrity knows nothing about combat flying in the deadliest theater of the war. They're wrong. Within 72 hours, Charles Lindbergh will demonstrate something that will revolutionize American air combat operations across the entire Pacific. He'll return from combat missions with fuel tanks, still carrying gallons that every other pilot has already burned through. He'll prove that the P-38 Lightning can reach targets previously considered unreachable. And he'll do it not with modifications or new technology, but with techniques so simple that fighter pilots will wonder why nobody thought of them before. This is the story of how the man who flew solo across the Atlantic became the secret weapon that extended American fighter range by 400 miles. How a civilian shot down a Japanese fighter in unauthorized combat, and how fuel efficiency became the key that unlocked Japan's heavily defended Pacific fortress. Because in the vast Pacific, where distance is measured in hundreds of miles over open ocean, range wasn't just an advantage. Range was survival. The summer of 1944. The Pacific War has reached a critical phase. American forces are advancing island by island toward Japan, but every advance requires air superiority. The Lockheed P-38 Lightning is the 5th Air Force's premier long-range fighter. Twin Allison V-1710 engines producing 1,600 horsepower each. Top speed of 420 miles per hour. Armed with 4 50-caliber Browning machine guns and one 20mm cannon, all mounted in the nose for devastating concentrated firepower. The P-38 has already proven itself deadly. Major Richard Bong, America's leading ace with 40 confirmed victories, flies the Lightning. Major Thomas McGuire commands the 475th Fighter Group, Satan's Angels, the most successful fighter group in the theater with over 500 victories. But the P-38 has a problem that's being measured in lives lost. Fighter pilots are drowning. Long-range escort missions require flights of 6, 7, sometimes 8 hours over open ocean where a single engine failure means immediate ejection. Too many pilots are fighting their way to targets, then watching fuel gauges drop toward empty on the long flight home. Some make it to friendly waters before their engines quit. Some don't. Either way, they're in the water, hoping rescue aircraft can find them before the vast Pacific claims another American life. The P-38 carries 410 gallons of internal fuel. With external drop tanks, it can theoretically achieve remarkable range. But under combat conditions, with pilots running engines at high power settings to stay combat ready, the twin Allison engines consume fuel at rates that transform 7-hour missions into barely survivable gambles. 5th Air Force Commander Lieutenant General George Kenney is losing pilots not to Japanese guns, but to fuel exhaustion. Modified fuel systems would require months of engineering. Meanwhile, every week, more fighters ditch in the Pacific. More pilots are lost. Then in June 1944, a solution arrives from an unexpected source. Charles Augustus Lindbergh lands at Hollandia, New Guinea, as a civilian technical representative for United Aircraft Corporation. Officially, he's there to evaluate the Corsair fighter. Unofficially, the man who flew the Spirit of St. Louis from New York to Paris has spent 3 years working miracles with aircraft fuel efficiency. Now, With the Navy's blessing, though notably not the War Department's, given President Roosevelt's continued animosity toward Lindbergh's pre-war isolationism, he's come to the Pacific to help. What Lindbergh discovers at Hollandia changes everything. Watching P-38 pilots prepare for missions, Lindbergh recognizes immediately what's wrong. The Army Air Forces have trained pilots to operate fighters at high manifold pressure and high revolutions per minute, keeping fuel mixtures on auto-rich to ensure maximum power for combat. It's aggressive flying that guarantees performance when Japanese fighters attack. It also burns fuel at catastrophic rates. Lindbergh, whose 1927 Atlantic crossing required nursing a single engine for 33 hours on finite fuel, understands something these combat pilots don't. Internal combustion engines are most efficient at specific combinations of manifold pressure, revolutions per minute, and fuel mixture. The Army's standard procedures ignore this reality. When Lindbergh meets General Kenny, he makes a bold claim. He can extend the P-38's combat radius by 400 miles without any modifications, just different operating procedures. Kenny, desperate for solutions, gives Lindbergh permission to work with the 475th Fighter Group. On June 16th, Lindbergh arrives at the 475th's base. Colonel Charles MacDonald is skeptical. What can a 42-year-old civilian tell the best pilots in the Pacific about flying? But MacDonald has his orders. Kenny wants Lindbergh given full cooperation. Lindbergh has never flown the Lightning before. He studies the technical manuals that night, memorizing systems and procedures. The next morning, with minimal ground instruction, he climbs into the cockpit and takes off. By the end of June 17th, he's logged 5 hours in the P-38 and declares himself ready for combat operations. The fighter pilots are not impressed. Flying around the local area is not combat. Combat is fighting zeros at altitude while managing fuel, ammunition, and formation integrity. Combat is flying for 7 hours knowing one miscalculation means you're swimming in the Pacific. Major Thomas McGuire, commanding the 431st Fighter Squadron, watches Lindbergh with particular skepticism. McGuire is 23 years old, aggressive, brilliant, with 30 victories. The idea that this civilian can teach him anything seems absurd. But when Colonel MacDonald assigns Lindbergh to fly wing for McGuire on an upcoming mission, the young major accepts without complaint. June 26, 1944. The mission is a bomber escort to Siram Island. 8 hours total flight time. Standard procedure: take off with full fuel and drop tanks, climb to altitude, fly to the target, protect the bombers, then make the long flight home, hoping fuel holds out. They take off at 10:30. 16 P-38s form up and head northwest. Lindbergh slots into position on McGuire's wing and holds formation perfectly. The other pilots notice. This old man can fly. The flight reaches Siram after several hours. Below, B-24s begin their bombing runs. The P-38s circle above, watching for Japanese interceptors. Japanese barges are spotted along the coast. MacDonald directs flights to strafe them. McGuire rolls into attack. Lindbergh follows, diving toward targets on the water, guns blazing. One vessel explodes as 50 caliber rounds tear into it. The mission continues without encountering Japanese fighters. After 3 hours in the target area, MacDonald orders the formation home. This is where fuel management becomes critical. The pilots drop their empty external tanks and settle into cruise formation for the long flight back. Standard procedure is 2,400 revolutions per minute at moderate manifold pressure, mixture on auto-rich to ensure power availability if combat develops. Lindbergh does something different. He reduces propeller revolutions per minute to 1,600. He increases manifold pressure slightly. He adjusts fuel mixture to auto-lean. The Allison engines smooth out, running efficiently at settings the other pilots would consider dangerously low. If Japanese fighters appear, he'll need seconds to advance throttles to combat power. But those seconds might mean the difference between swimming in the Pacific and landing with fuel remaining. When the formation lands at Finschhafen, after 8 hours and 15 minutes, the other pilots shut down and check fuel gauges. Most have between 10 and 30 gallons remaining, enough for perhaps 10 more minutes of flight. Lindbergh shuts down his engines. His crew chief climbs up to check fuel. The chief looks at the gauges, looks again, then calls up, "Sir, you've got 260 gallons remaining." 260 gallons, enough for 2 more hours, enough to fly another 400 miles. The crew chief thinks the gauges are broken. They physically measure the fuel. The gauges are accurate. After 8 hours, including combat operations, Lindbergh has returned with fuel that every other pilot has already burned. Word spreads through the 475th like wildfire. That's impossible. They all flew the same mission. How did he bring back fuel nobody else has? That evening, Colonel MacDonald calls an assembly. Under unshaded light bulbs in the recreation hall, pilots gather. All of them want to know how Lindbergh performed what seems like magic. MacDonald asks Lindbergh to explain his techniques. What follows is a master class in engine efficiency. Lindbergh explains that standard procedures are designed for maximum power availability, not maximum range. High revolutions per minute and rich fuel mixtures ensure engines can produce full power instantly, but they consume fuel at rates far exceeding what's necessary for cruise flight. He describes how higher manifold pressure at lower revolutions per minute can produce the same thrust while consuming significantly less fuel. How auto-lean mixture reduces fuel flow by eliminating excess fuel that auto-rich provides as a safety margin. The pilots push back. They've been trained that high manifold pressure at low revolutions per minute will damage engines. That auto-lean mixture will cause engines to run too hot and detonate. Lindbergh responds calmly. These concerns are valid at extreme settings, but the settings he recommends are well within the engine's design parameters. He's been flying engines this way for nearly 20 years across thousands of hours with multiple aircraft types. He's never damaged an engine with proper cruise settings. Major McGuire asks the critical question, what about combat readiness? If Japanese fighters attack during cruise flight, won't it take too long to advance power? Lindbergh acknowledges the concern. Yes, it will take perhaps 5 seconds to go from cruise settings to combat power, but those 5 seconds won't matter if you're ditching in the ocean 300 miles from home because you ran out of fuel. He makes them an offer. Fly missions with him. Use his techniques. If they don't work, abandon them. But if they work, you'll gain range that makes currently impossible missions achievable. You'll reach targets the Japanese think are safe. And you'll make it home instead of dying in the Pacific. The next mission proves Lindbergh right. Pilots who adopt his techniques return with fuel reserves that stagger them. Within 2 weeks, the entire 475th Fighter Group has adopted Lindbergh's cruise settings. On July 27th, a P-38 formation flies a mission to the Halmahera Islands, 1,280 miles round trip. It's the longest fighter escort mission yet attempted in the Pacific. Without Lindbergh's techniques, it would be impossible. With them, all aircraft return safely with fuel remaining. The mission proves P-38s can now escort bombers to targets the Japanese thought were beyond American fighter range. But Lindbergh's contribution isn't finished, because the civilian is about to do something that could end his participation in combat operations permanently. He's about to shoot down a Japanese fighter. July 28, 1944. Lindbergh is flying wing for Major McGuire on a fighter sweep over Seram Island. 12 P-38s form the strike package. Lindbergh, officially present as an observer testing fuel techniques, is not authorized to engage in offensive combat. He's a civilian. International law prohibits civilians from engaging in combat. If captured after shooting down enemy aircraft, the Japanese can legally execute him as an unlawful combatant. General Kenny has made this clear. Lindbergh can fly missions, can defend himself if attacked, but cannot seek combat. Over Searam Island, the P-38s sweep the coastline looking for targets. Japanese barges are spotted and strafed. Then someone calls out, "Bogies!" Two Japanese aircraft, identified as Mitsubishi Ki-51 Sonya reconnaissance aircraft, are spotted ahead. The formation wheels to pursue. One Sonya, piloted by Captain Shimada according to post-war records, reverses course and flies directly toward the pursuing American fighters. It's desperate, but desperation sometimes creates opportunity. The Sonya flies straight at Lindbergh's P-38. Perhaps Shimada identifies Lindbergh's aircraft as less threatening. Perhaps it's random chance. Either way, the Japanese fighter is heading toward Charles Lindbergh at a combined closing speed exceeding 500 miles per hour. Lindbergh has a choice: break away, evading the head-on pass. It's the safe choice, the legal choice, or fire. Lindbergh opens fire. His tracers and 20mm shells splatter on the Sonya's engine. They approach head-on, too close, hurtling at each other at more than 500 miles per hour combined. Lindbergh pulls back on the controls with all his strength. The two aircraft pass within feet of each other. Lindbergh cranes his neck, looking back. The Sonya is smoking heavily, its engine shattered by concentrated fire. The aircraft noses over and plunges toward the water. No parachute. Captain Shimada rides his aircraft into the ocean. Charles Lindbergh has just shot down a Japanese fighter in air-to-air combat. The other pilots see it. They know what it means. If the Japanese capture him, they can execute him. If word reaches Washington, there will be political consequences. But the pilots of the 475th don't see a legal problem. They see a fellow fighter pilot who engaged the enemy and emerged victorious. When the formation lands, congratulations flow freely. General Kenny hears about the engagement within hours. He summons Lindbergh to headquarters. The meeting is tense. Kenny makes it clear: Lindbergh cannot engage in combat again. The risk is too great. If it happens again, Lindbergh will be ordered out of the theater. Lindbergh agrees. He will observe only. But the transformation is complete. The pilots who once viewed him as a civilian observer now treat him as a combat veteran. Over the next 6 weeks, Lindbergh flies approximately 50 combat missions with 5th Air Force units. He continues refining and teaching his fuel management techniques. Everywhere he goes, the results are identical. Pilots using his methods return with dramatically increased fuel reserves. Missions previously considered too distant become routine. The effective combat radius of the P-38 Lightning increases from roughly 650 miles to over 1,000 miles. Japanese bases that were safe from American fighters suddenly come under attack. Bomber formations penetrating deep into enemy territory now have fighter escort all the way to targets and back. Japanese fighters that could attack bombers, knowing escorts would have to turn back early now, face P-38s that can stay throughout the entire mission. The fork-tailed devil becomes even more terrifying. It can reach anywhere. It can stay on station for hours. And when it fights, it wins. By mid-August 1944, Lindbergh's time in the Pacific ends. General Kenny, grateful for his contributions but unwilling to risk another combat incident, orders him back to the United States. Lindbergh leaves having flown over 90 hours of combat missions, having shot down one Japanese fighter, and having fundamentally changed how the Pacific Air War is fought. His fuel management techniques become standard operating procedure throughout 5th Air Force and spread to other Pacific commands. The impact is measurable in missions flown and targets destroyed, but it's also measurable in lives saved. Pilots who would have ditched due to fuel exhaustion make it home. Fighters that would have been lost are available for tomorrow's missions. Major Richard Bong continues flying P-38s using Lindbergh's techniques, reaching 40 confirmed victories before being rotated home. Major Thomas Maguire, who initially viewed Lindbergh skeptically, becomes his friend and adopts his methods completely. Tragically, Maguire doesn't survive the war. On January 7, 1945, while attempting to save a wingman from Japanese attack, his P-38 stalls and crashes. With 38 confirmed victories, Thomas Maguire is posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, becoming the second highest-scoring American ace in history. The 475th Fighter Group becomes the highest-scoring P-38 unit in World War II, with 552 confirmed aerial victories. Their success is built on superior aircraft, outstanding pilots, aggressive tactics, and the range extension that Lindbergh provided. The story of Charles Lindbergh in the Pacific War is complicated by his pre-war history, his isolationist stance, his opposition to American entry into World War II. His controversial statements created animosity between him and the Roosevelt administration. President Roosevelt refused to reinstate Lindbergh's commission in the Army Air Corps despite his extensive aviation experience. Lindbergh served as a civilian throughout the war, never receiving official recognition for his combat missions or his technical contributions. But the pilots of the 5th Air Force knew what he'd done for them. The commanders who used his techniques to plan missions previously considered impossible knew. The bomber crews, who received fighter escort deep into enemy territory because P-38s could now reach them, knew. And most importantly, the pilots who made it home instead of ditching in the Pacific because they had fuel reserves Lindbergh's methods provided. They knew. Lindbergh's insight was simple but profound. Higher manifold pressure at lower revolutions per minute produces the same thrust while consuming less fuel. Auto-lean mixture eliminates excess fuel that's not being burned. The slower turning propeller reduces drag. The result is the same performance with dramatically reduced fuel consumption. Standard cruise settings consumed approximately 90 to 100 gallons per hour for both engines. Lindbergh's settings reduced consumption to approximately 60 to 70 gallons per hour. Over an 8-hour mission, that translated to savings of 160 to 240 gallons, the difference between landing with reserve or ditching in the ocean. After returning to the United States, Lindbergh continued aviation technical work. He served as a consultant to the Navy, helping develop tactics for carrier operations. After the war, his commission was restored by President Eisenhower, and he became a brigadier general in the Air Force Reserve. He lived until 1974, dying at age 72 at his home in Hawaii. The P-38 Lightning continued serving until war's end. In the Pacific alone, P-38s were credited with over 1,800 Japanese aircraft destroyed in aerial combat. Both of America's top two aces flew Lightnings. The aircraft's distinctive design and concentrated armament made it instantly recognizable and universally feared by Japanese pilots. General George Kenney, 5th Air Force commander who brought Lindbergh into the theater, later wrote about his contribution. Lindbergh taught my pilots things about fuel economy that the manufacturers and training command had never taught them. He showed them how to get 50% more range from their fighters without any modifications. That's not a minor achievement. That's a strategic game changer delivered by one man working with existing equipment and simple physics. The greatest weapons of World War II aren't always visible. Sometimes they're simple insights applied consistently. Sometimes their knowledge shared freely rather than hoarded. Sometimes they're techniques that don't require new equipment, just new thinking. Charles Lindbergh's contribution was extending the range of the P-38 Lightning by teaching pilots to operate their engines efficiently. It doesn't sound dramatic. But it changed what American fighters could do and where they could fight. It made previously impossible missions routine. It brought pilots home who would otherwise have been lost. And it demonstrated that sometimes the key to victory isn't building bigger weapons, it's using existing weapons more intelligently. The summer of 1944, Finschhafen Air Base. A 42-year-old civilian climbs out of a P-38 Lightning after his final combat mission. Around him, young fighter pilots shake his hand, thank him for the techniques that will bring them home safely tomorrow and the next day and every day until the war ends. Charles Lindbergh walks away from the flight line knowing he's done what he came to do. He's extended American fighter range by 400 miles. He's taught fuel efficiency to pilots who thought they knew everything about flying. He's helped shorten the war. And he's proven again what he proved 17 years earlier over the Atlantic. That range is a weapon, that efficiency is strategy, and that sometimes the difference between victory and defeat is knowing how to make your fuel last just a little bit longer. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe. There's plenty more where this came from. See you in the next one.